Now, of course, you can see how powerful this is because you can just create a complete onboarding process for someone like jane@doe.com with a password of password. Then you say, all right, my name is Jane Doe. I'm from 123 Example Road in Cityville, Statesville, 12345, and I'm from the country of Townsville. Why not? Click next step. Maybe you have a list of users to follow. You click to follow, and then you click finish. You go to the home page. If they ever want to edit their account, they can click edit, and they have all those fields there just like you would expect. This video is going to cover adding an onboarding process to our blog application. We're going to go through this a little bit quicker. This was a viewer request by one of the members of the channel, actually. I think Clint sent me an email last week asking if I could cover the Wicked Gem. I'll have a link to that GitHub page in the video description. And I did this by following a guide from 2014 by Josh M. MacArthur, and it covered it pretty well. Basically, we're going to be creating a different full name for our users as opposed to a single name, and we're going to give each user an address. The address will have multiple parts. It'll have a street, city, state, zip code, and country that you manually input. It's not going to be super fancy, and I wouldn't recommend displaying the address on the homepage, but it's just so we can see how to do something like this. Now, there are quite a few things we need to go over, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is run a bundle add wicked command to add the wicked gem. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a Railsg migration, add names to user. We're going to add a first name and a last name. Next step is going to be a Railsg migration to create the addresses. So actually it's going to be a Railsg model. We're going to call it address. We're going to give each one a street, city, state, a zip of type integer, a country, and a user : references. Next, we're going to have to run a Railsg migration to add the address to the user, which is just going to be address : references, because each user is going to have a single address. And the last thing we need to do is run a Railsg migration, remove name from user, and we're going to remove the old name field that we had. Now, before we run this, we're going to come over to the database migrate, and inside of our create addresses, we're going to change this. It's going to have this null false. We're going to get rid of that, and we'll save that. We'll then come up here just to check and make sure this one with the add address, we're going to get rid of that. Null false. And I think that's good for now. So now that we have all of those, we're going to go ahead and change how our seed file works. So the first thing I want to do is in our DB, we're going to create a folder, call it seeds. Inside of that seeds folder, we're going to create 3 different files. I'm just going to copy these from my other directory and paste them in here. We're going to create a development.rb, a production.rb, and a test.rb. Now you can see here the test, we actually don't need this. It just has the words puts testing seed or seeding test database. This one has the production database, and this one has the development database. So, or the development seed file. I don't know why I'm saying database. So we're going to run these, and I'll go over this in a second, but we're going to come into our seed file here. We're going to copy this, and we're going to paste the contents of our seeds.rb into our development.rb. So this is what our old development seeds looks like. And for this one right here, which is our seeds.rb, we're just going to get rid of this whole thing. And we're just going to put in a line that says puts seeding database. And we're going to run a command that is load, lowercase load, rails.root.join, db, which is our db folder, seeds, which is our seeds folder, and then our environment .rb, which if we're running in development will be the development environment. So it's going to run the seed file in here called development.rb whenever we run Rails DB seed. If we're trying to seed our production database, we just have to say Rails_env equals production space and then Rails DB seed, and it will run this prod.rb one right here. So inside of our development.rb, we're going to change a couple things. The first one is right up here. We're just going to have a puts to say we're seeding the development database. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change this user.create to be Dean equals user.first or create exclamation mark. First or create, we'll just try and find it if it already exists, because create was blowing up the database whenever we tried to create something. We're then going to get rid of the name field and replace it with a first name and a last name. The rest of it will stay the same. For the John Doe, we're going to do the same thing. So it's going to be, it's going to be John equals user.first or create. And then we're just passing in a first name and a last name. That means we can get rid of these two calls right here because we now have the variables from up top. And the reason why we did that is because we can create a address, and we'll do it down here. And the address is going to be address.first or create exclamation mark, where we pass in a street, a city, a state, a zip code, a country, and then a user. So there you can see it's the Dean user. And then we'll do the same thing down here with the exact same info, but it'll just be for the John user. And I know I'm going a little bit fast here, but it's pretty boring to watch me type out all of these fields. So we're just going to paste them in, and then you can copy them if you'd like to. The last thing I changed was just down here. I changed this to say we seeded the development DB in blah, blah, blah seconds. So now that that's all done, we can now go ahead and run a Rails DB colon, probably a reset command. So we have pending migration. So we'll run a Rails DB colon migrate command, and then we'll run a DB colon seed command right after. I just realized that we didn't actually do this correctly. So we're going to exit out of here, and we're going to change this from the 10,000 we have down to just 10 posts with 5 comments each. I'm going to run a Rails DB colon reset command because there's really no reason to have all of those posts and comments. So there we go. We're done in like a third of a second. So that's nice. Now we have that done. We now need to think about what this actual workflow is going to look like. So we're going to run a Rails S. Basically what I want to happen, this is going to break, so we're going to have to fix that, is when we go through the user sign up, I want to enter the email, password, and password confirmation. Click next. It's then going to take us to the first page where we enter our first name and last name. Then we're going to click next. It's going to take us to the address page. We're going to click next. It's going to take us to a list of users in the application just to show that we can do it. And then we're going to click finish, and we'll be done with the onboarding. So the first thing we need to change is our search here because it's searching for the user underscore name, which doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to come into views. I think this is the search. No, it's going to be in layouts, nav bar, and we'll just see what this is searching for. So it's the search form. Okay. So in the search form right here where it has or user name, we're going to say or user first name or user last name. That'll take care of that error. Next thing we'll do is we'll log into the dean@example.com account. And in here, it's going to be checking the session manager, which is inside of user. So we'll come into the session manager. And in here, we have the current user.name. We're going to replace this with current user.full name. And then we're going to come over to our models, our user model. And in here, we're going to create a method called full name. And we're actually going to change this to be first name.capitalize and last name.capitalize. And then we can refresh. So now we're searching by first name and last name, but we're displaying by the full name. Next, we can come over to our blog page and the same thing will happen. So inside of our underscore post.html.erb, so come down to our posts, our underscore post, and right here we have the user.name. We'll just paste in full name. I'll actually copy that. We can come over to our comments real quick and our comment partial, because in here we're displaying the user email. We're going to change that to the user full name. We can then come into our admin dashboard, and I think it's our show page. And in here we have the user.name. We're going to replace that. And down here we have the comment.user. We're going to replace that with the full name as well. Then come over to our post page in the admin dashboard. And we'll change this one to display the user full name. And now we'll come over to our app again and refresh. And now we should be good to go to all of these. Looks like that's all working. Let me click on the show page here. Yeah, so it looks like we're good. So that takes care of that. Now I want to go through the full sign up process. So when you go through with the Wicked gem, which we'll go right now, you're going to have a couple steps. The first one we need to do is generate a after sign up controller. I'm just going to manually create that. So I'm going to right click new file in controllers and call it after sign up controller.rb. And in here, we're just going to create a after sign up controller, which is going to include the Wicked wizard, and it's going to need a list of steps. Now they suggest you to use a set of steps like this, but the article that I reference here actually has a set of steps that works a little bit differently. So we're going to use that approach because I think it's a bit more flexible. So we have to come into our user model, and this is where we're going to start our modifications. The first thing we need to do is give the user a address. So right up here, we're going to say the user has one address, which is dependent destroy. It is an inverse of user with an autosave of true. I actually don't know if the autosave of true is necessary, but it's on there, so whatever. The reason why we give it a dependent destroy is because it's a has one. When we go through and if we decide to edit the address in the sign up page, we don't want to create a new address every time. This way it'll destroy the old address after it creates the new one. So that way you always only have one address. The other thing we need is that list of steps. We can do that by creating a class level accessor, which is a CATTR accessor for the form steps. We do a %W, and then we pass in the steps we need. The sign up step is just a fake step that I use while we're actually creating the account so that the wizard doesn't get confused. And then we have a step to set our name, a step to set our address, and a step to just show the users or whatever. The next thing we need to add is a attribute accessor here. And this is just for the actual instance. So think of your current user. And we just want to check what step we're on. The last thing we need to do here is add in a accepts nested attributes for the address, which has an allow destroy of true. And the reason why we have the accepts nested attributes is because we're going to edit the address in our user form. So whenever we come in here, we want to be able to edit our account and edit the user form. And it looks like we missed something here. So anywhere where we have a text field for the name, we're going to have to change that. So I'm actually going to hit a Control-Shift-F to search for that. Looks like there's one in the edit page, and there's one in the new page. So the edit page, we're going to paste this down here. We're going to make this one the first name. And we're going to make this one the last name. And then in our new, we're going to come in here and we're just going to get rid of this. We're no longer signing up with a name. We're doing that during the onboarding. It's something from a Facebook interview that I saw earlier. Basically, they said, don't delay the sign up process, make them make an account as soon as possible, and then deal with all that stuff in the actual onboarding. That way they're already invested by having an account. And I figure if anyone's good at like weaseling their way into your lives, it's probably Facebook. So probably just follow their practices. Just don't follow them too closely because you probably still want to be able to look into a mirror at the end of the day. But okay, now we can move on. We have the user.rb set up. We now need to do our validations. This is a little bit tricky. Basically, we have multiple steps. The first step, we set our names. The second step, we set our address. So if we want to make sure that the user has a name and has an address to make sure those are required, we can't say that we like validate the presence of the address right away. The reason being, if we did that, let's say we had this validates address right here, put it down below this accessor. Let's say you had this. What happens if you try to set your name? Because you're trying to update your user, but you don't have an address. So how do you set this to be required? Well, the way that you can do that is with a special method here that we're going to create in a second, where we do a comma if required for step set address. So we can create that required for step method down here. And what this is going to do is it's going to take in a step. So in this case, let's say we set our name and we're now on set address. It's going to return true if the form step, which is right up here, is nil. And we want to give this an initial value. So we're going to create a method here called form step, which is going to be at form step or equals to sign up. So if at form step already has a value, like let's say you're on set address, it'll be equal to set address. Or if it's nil, it'll be equal to sign up, which is just our first form step. So this is going to take in a step. Let's say we're on set address. This is a zero-based array. So this is 0, 1, 2. Set address is equal to 2. Just keep that in mind for the index. It's going to return true if form step is nil. It's not nil. We're on this step right here. We're then going to return true if form steps.index step 2s, this is going to be step 2, is less than or equal to form steps.index form step.2s. The step we pass in here for the address is step 2. The current step we're on is, let's say, step 2. So we need to have this return true now, in which case this will be a required validation. Now, let's say we have something similar for our first name, last name. For this, we can do a combined validation with a with options call, where we say if required for step set name, which has a value of 1. So if it's required, if we are on form steps index step right here is 1. And let's say this is required, but we're on, like, I don't know, set address as our form step. It's going to be less than or equal to set address because this is 2, this is 1, which means this is going to be true. But let's say we're on set name, right? A value of 1. That's our form step. And we're on set name checking if it's required for the step. This will be true because this is 1 and we're on step 1. This right here is going to pass in 2. It's going to pass in set address, which is going to be equal to 2. And that form step, which is the current step we're on, is still set to step 1 for set name. So it's going to be, is 2 less than or equal to 1? No. In which case we're going to return false. Now, what's interesting here is this is probably not necessary. You can probably just return this, right? I don't know why these returns are there. Let me just move this over. This should work just fine now. And basically all we're doing is, because these are going to run at every single one of these steps, we just want to make sure that we're only validating up to the step that we're at. So you can think of this as having a value of 1, and this will have a value of 2. If we're on step 1, this one runs, but value of 2 doesn't run. If we're on step 2, that means that this one has to run and this one has to run, and they both have to return true. Now that we're done with that, and you'll see in a little bit when we get to the actual form, it'll make a lot more sense. We can go over to the after signup controller, and we can grab those steps from our C attribute accessor, which is just going to take in the steps argument, just like we have here. But instead, we're going to do asterisk user.formSteps to say that we have a variable number of arguments. Next, we need to have a show method. The way that this is described in the GitHub repo is you have your @user set to current user, your render wizard, and then between them, you create a switch case for the current step that you're on. When we're on the sign up page, we just say skip step. If user persisted, you can even just do skip step. This is just to deal with the fact that we're registering a user. We need a fake step while we're doing the user account creation. When we are on the set address page, we're going to need to have an address object. So we're just creating the address object. And we're on the find users page. We're just saying @users equals user.all. The question is, after we go through the sign up process, right? So I'm going to come over here, log out, sign up. Say I do a test at case.com with a password of password. When I click sign up, it needs to take me to the after signup page. Here it's trying to redirect me to the root path. That's not going to work. So to get to the actual signup page, and now I have managed to completely lock myself in here, I'm going to do a user.last.destroy to sign myself out. So to get to this after signup page, you have to go into your controllers and your users controller and your registrations controller. If you don't have these, you can stop the server and run a railsg devise :controller user command. And if you need the views that we're going to be editing, just type railsg devise views. I'll run a rails s though, because I already have both of those folders created. After you have them created, you're going to need to come into your routes file, and you're going to need to add this block to override the registrations controller. But okay, we have those. We need to come into our registrations controller and scroll down to the bottom here. We can get rid of this setup right here. Oops. We can get rid of this name. We don't need that anymore. And we can come down here to the after signup path for. Instead of doing a super resource, we can change this to be a after signup path for set name. So we finish our signup, we come here to the after signup path, and then it sends us to the wizard, which is what this path is, with the set name. Now let me just check and make sure we've created our routes for this. Doesn't look like we have. So I'll just add those in real quick. We're going to come down here below the user, and we're going to create resources after sign up. And then we can actually get rid of this user's profile up here. That's not necessary. So that'll take us from our registrations controller to the after signup controller. Now in the after signup controller, we're going to need a couple more methods. The first one we're going to create down here is going to be a private method for the finish wizard path. So once you're done with your 4 steps, you're then going to go to the finish wizard path, which will take us to the root path. The next thing we need is the onboarding method. So this is going to be for our parameters. It's going to take in a single argument of step, which is going to be equal to sign up. And before we actually do this, we're just going to pretend that we have the onboarding params set up, and we're going to create the update method. And that's just because it's going to make a lot more sense when you see how we use it, because at first this seemed pretty mysterious to me. We're once again going to create a case. And for the case, we're going to check when we set name. We're going to check when we set address. And then we'll do an end. So when we set the name, we're once again going to set the current user up top. But when we set the name, we want to do a @user.update with the onboarding params where we pass in the step. So this is just the default equal to sign up if you have no other parameters, but here we have a parameter. It's our step, which is set name. So we need to grab the parameters for when we're setting the name. We're going to do that down here by saying the permitted parameters are equal to a switch case, which has a when for the sign up. And I'm just going to hit tab, but this is not what we need. So when we sign up, when we set name, we need to do a required parameter equal to user. And we need to pass in these 2 parameters as our permitted parameters. So down here, we're going to do a params.require for the required parameter, which here is the user, and here the required parameters will be the address. So you can see when we're setting the name, we use one parameter, and when we're setting the address, we use another. Then we need to do a permit, which is going to permit the ID. I don't know if that's necessary, but I just have it in my spaghetti code over here. And then we do the permitted parameters. So this is your usual stuff where you're saying you're going to allow these things in, and actually we want to allow in the country as well. And then after we do the permitted parameters, we then want to do a .merge where we put in the form step that we're currently on, which is the step. You can probably see how this happens here. So this goes into our @user update with the onboarding params. It takes in the form step as one of the parameters. And then in our user model, And then in our user model, that gets set to our form step, which is how in our required for step, it's checking the current form step. Okay, we can come back to here and scroll up because we need to finish our update method. So we check if we have these onboarding parameters. Then we want to check if we're updating the user. So this is actually redundant. So we check if the @user can update, and if the user can update, we render user. If the user can't update, we render user with the status unprocessable entity. Basically, we're just checking to see if there's an error, and if there is, we want to render it. We're going to do something very similar down here for the address, just a little bit more involved. Basically, we call @user.createAddress, which is just a method to create the user's has one child. We pass in the onboarding parameters just like before, but with the address, we don't need the form step because this is going to be going through the actual address. And we just check if it can create it. If it can, it'll render the wizard. If it can't, it'll just call address.destroy. Again, don't know if this is necessary. And then it'll render the @user. I think this might be covered by what we have in the model logic, but I'm not sure because it's like 3 a.m. and I'm sort of winging this. But okay, now that we have that, let's come back over here and click sign up. We'll do a test at case.com with a password of password. And now it's going to tell us we have a missing template for the after sign up set name. So now we have to start creating all these templates. For this, I'm going to once again just copy some files that we have here into the after sign up. So I'm going to paste these in and we'll go through these one by one. In the set name, we have a div with a class of container because we're using Bootstrap, an H1 that says set your name. And then we have this big old form here. So this is just like a regular form you get from a scaffold. You can even come into the posts and the post form right here, or sorry, the post form. And it looks very similar. So it's just that sort of setup that we have where we are just creating a form for the @user with a method of put and a URL set to the wizard path. That part's important. And then down here, this is the actual contents. We're creating a div with the class of form control, a legend of your name. We create a text field for the first name, set the required to true. A text field for the last name, set the required to true. We then create a div with a class of dflex and the flex-row-reverse. We render the links and we render a f.submit for the next step with a class button primary. And we render the sign up links again down here. I don't know why. We'll deal with that in a second. Then we have our field with errors down here being set to display inline. And now if I refresh this page, and it's giving us an error. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our user.rb. And for these, we're just going to check unless first name.nil. And then unless last name.nil. I forgot that I had these in the little nav bar. So that takes care of that. Let me come over here and refresh. I'm going to sign out, sign up, test1 at case.com with a password of password. There we go. So now we have this set name field. I can click next. It'll tell us to fill out the form. So I'll say this is test. Click next. Set case. We'll go to the next step, and here we need to set something for the address. But I can actually go back here, and it'll take us back to the first page. So you can see here with the, let me just open this up. With the links here, we're doing a check for the links. I don't think this link right here is necessary, and we actually don't need this one either. Just because we're on the first page, it doesn't really make sense to have these links here, but I had the logic to check them anyways. Basically, our link right here is just a check to see if the previous step is sign up, which was the first step. So this will be, so the only time this will happen is if you're on the set name. So if you're on the set name, it doesn't show you the back button. If you're on any of the other pages, it shows you the back button. Okay, we have this address right here. If we open up set address, it's another big one. It's just a div with a class of container where we say set your name still. I'll change this to set your address. It's a form for the @address with a method of put, a URL of wizard path, Same thing for the errors, which means we have the same inline styling down here. We then create a form control with a legend of your address. It's basically what we did over here, copied over. And then I just wrapped the street in a M2. I gave the street a form control. And this actually should say street, not address number 1. I then created the city, the state, and the zip code, which all have the same placeholder. They're all set to require true. You could probably change this from like a text field to whatever you want for the zip code to make sure it's a number. And then here for the country, it's just another text field. Then we have a div with a class of row, a class or a call-10, and a call-2 to move the button links over to the right side. So that's what pushes these over here. We render the links, which again, because we're not on the first page, it'll render the back button. We then call f.submit for the next step, give it a primary button color, and it looks like this. The problem is in our address, we don't have any validations yet. So we just want to make sure those are validated, and we want to make sure that the inverse of the address exists. So for that, we're going to set the belongs to user inverse of address. And then we're going to validate all of these presences to true. You can save this and exit out, and we'll just set a fake address of 123 example in Cityville with Statesville and a zip code of 12345, and then we'll say we are in Country, I guess. We'll click next. And here's our users to follow list, which I can open that up. So our find users. Here it just has an H1 with the users to follow, a strong of I didn't implement following, just pretend, a BR tag, a link to the finish, which is just the next wizard path. And then for each of the users, we just print out their email and their user ID, and then we render the sign up links again, which means we're just rendering the back button. So if we go back, it actually doesn't save our address. So what we can do there is we can check the controller after sign up controller. So that's up here. And I think that's because we're grabbing the @address instead of grabbing a @user.address. So if we do that and then we refresh, that'll work. But let me just make sure this is actually working. So we're going to delete the address real quick. Come into terminal, Rails C, address.first. I'll say destroy. Now I'll refresh. Oops. Now I'll go back, click next step. Seems to still be there. So let me just grab a user.last.address. It's still there, so let me type destroy on that again. And now it's nil. So now we can check to see how we handle if it's nil. So what we can do here is we can just check if the address exists. So we'll just say if @user.address.nil, set it equal to a new address, else else @address equals @user.address, which is just going to be reduced to that. Now, of course, I would suggest moving this into a separate method because, you know, this is just a little bit messy. So we'll just say get address, and we can come down here, do a def get address, or we just return whatever we need. Now we can come over here and refresh, and now it's set to blank. So we'll say 123 example with Cityville, Statesville, 12345, Countryville. Click next step. It creates the address right here. We go back and now it's filled. Come back here to the first one, click next, and it's still filled. So now that all that's done, we click finish and it takes us to the home page. And now we probably want to render what we have. So we're going to come to the home page here inside of our pages and our home page. In our home page, we're just going to render a block right here that has all of that stuff inside of it. I'm also going to change this container up top to be a card, and we're going to wrap these buttons inside of a card action div just to style this a bit. So this is pretty basic. It's just a check if the user's logged in. If the user's logged in, then show the user info, which is just current user.full name, which we don't need the titleize for. And then all of this is just a call to all of those methods. And the only one that doesn't have a titleize is the zip because it's a number. So come over here and refresh, and now we're seeing all of that info. And now for the part that took me a little bit to figure out, we're going to try to update the user's info in the Devise registrations edit page, I think. So we're going to come over here to the registrations edit page. And we have our first name and last name in here. And below that, what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a fields for tag, which is just a tag for the child fields of a element. So here we're doing it for the fields of the user, which is going to be for the address. We do a c.hidden field for the ID of the address. And then inside of this, it's just a regular form. So I'm going to grab all of this and paste it in. Basically, you just do a legend of address, and then for each of these, you do a c.label, c.text, c.label, c.text for the street, the city, the state, the zip, and the country. And if I come in here and I click edit on my account, you can see here it has the first name and last name, and then the entire address here. I can say 12345 example, and then I pass in my password, and it doesn't change to 12345 example. And the reason for that is we have to update the registrations controller. So we'll come up here to users, registrations controller, and we got rid of the keys in here, but we need to change the update method when we update a user. And we need to do a check if the current user.build address. So if a user has an address, we don't do this, but if a user doesn't have an address yet, then we need to build one. And you probably want to build one with the address params and not just do it blank. But if the user already has an address, then we call current user.address.update, where we pass in the address parameters. Now these address parameters go down here. We create a private area where we say address params require the address, permit the ID, street, city, state, zip code, and country. Now, if we try to do this and we come in here, we click edit account, we change this to 123456 example, and we pass in the password. It does the 123456 example, but up here you can see we had a whole bunch of unpermitted parameters. So if we try to edit our account, let's say we want to change this to testy test as our first name, it doesn't change our testy test. The reason is we have to permit all those parameters for our sign up or for our account update as well, which means we need to add in basically all of that stuff. And I don't know which of these are required, but I just passed in all of the parameters until I stopped getting errors. So I passed in the email, the first name, the last name, password, password confirmation, and current password. That's all for old stuff on the account, except for the first name and last name. And because the address is a nested child, we have to say the address %i, where we pass in the street, city, state, zip, and country of it. We can come back here to edit our account, change this back to 123 example. We'll pass in our password, and we'll change this to be testy test again. We'll click update. You can see here 123 example, and testy test is now our name. Now, of course, you can see how powerful this is because you can just create a complete onboarding process for someone like Jane at doe.com with a password of password. Then you say, all right, my name is Jane Doe. I'm from 123 Example Road in Cityville, Statesville, 12345, and I'm from the country of Townsville. Why not? Click next step. Maybe you have a list of users to follow. You click to follow, and then you click finish. You go to the home page. If they ever want to edit their account, they can click edit, and they have all those fields there just like you would expect. But all right, that's going to do it for this tutorial. I know that was a lot. Again, thank you to Clint for the suggestion. Also, thank you for supporting the channel. If you're not already a channel member, it's the same thing as a Patreon subscription. It just helps support the channel. It helps me out a lot. And sometimes, you know, I see the suggestions from you more easily because the member comments bubble up to the top of a video. As involved as this tutorial was, let me tell you, it was nothing compared to this tutorial that I made the other day. It was a 2-hour-long React tutorial that covered creating a user authentication system for React where you can log in and log out through a Rails API. If you're interested in that video, I'll have a link to that video on the screen right now. So you can just go ahead and click it. You can click the link right now and go watch that tutorial. That would be great. And I'll see you in the next video.